In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Today's reading is taken from Matthew chapter 25, and a harsh reading. When you first pick up the text and you read through it, particularly with how it ends, I thought it might be right for us to put it into context, both liturgical and scriptural, and then to have a couple of reflections on what the text there reveals to us. The first thing to say about this is, while you're reading this, it's about a judgment of God, and that's what Matthew chapter 25 is all about. It's considered in big words the eschatological discourse. This is the coming judgment of God, and here Christ is teaching how that judgment will happen and on what it will be based. So a person might read this and immediately start thinking hellfire and brimstone, be terrified, and walk out of here wondering, am I ever going to make it? Believe it or not, that would not be how this is supposed to be approached. Yes, with reverence. Yes, with a sense of urgency, a sense of going out to do something about it. But it's important, especially if we count ourselves Orthodox Christians, whenever we encounter a text in the Scriptures, that it is placed within context, that the language is understood, and that the season, its liturgical purpose, that is, for its use, is understood as well. When it comes to this text, when we usually encounter this as Orthodox Christians, if anybody feels that this feels familiar to you, is Holy Tuesday. On Holy Tuesday, during Holy Week, this is one of the readings that's read during that day as we go through all of Matthew chapter 25 and other verses that are there. And while it's a very intimidating series of readings, Christ goes through calling the Pharisees hypocrites. He calls people out for their inaction, the fact that people haven't lifted a finger to take care of the poor. He goes through a whole host of these readings. We have to remind ourselves that what is the name of this service where we are hearing this reading? Because we don't often hear this one on a Sunday. The name of the service where this text is read is called the bridegroom service. The bridegroom service is something we should probably have in mind. And by that I mean probably the icon of the bridegroom. If anyone's ever seen the icon of the bridegroom, I believe it's just over here around the corner. It paints an image of the lover of mankind, of our Redeemer, of our bridegroom, of him who comes after us, plated with a crown of thorns, holding the reed with which they will beat him, clothed in purple, mocked, covered in spit and blood. And that's the person whom we have in mind when we consider who will be judging us. How does God feel about us? What will the end look like? And after we go through this really intense reading of all these judgments, what do? We line up, every one of us, and we venerate this image of Christ. It's very easy to misunderstand these judgments of God as painting a picture of a God who's mad at us and is after us. But as Isaac the Syrian said just a couple of weeks ago, anybody who would look at Christ's salvific action and think the only reason that he came was to set us right or to forgive sins misses the depth of who he is. The reason that he comes is because he loves us. That's why he takes on flesh, to be spat upon, beaten. He can go into the gutter and talk to people who are poor. He can tell the lame to stand upright. People have been ostracized and kicked out by their communities. They're welcome home again. He doesn't just set us right to forgive sins because that is who he is, but he loves us. And that's why he comes to reveal himself to us in that way. So when we read this text and we understand this notion of judgment in the Orthodox Church, it's important that we understand what judgment we are talking about. Because not just in the context of the bridegroom, but even John Chrysostom says, what shall we say about this judgment of God? It's a strange one. He says there's no lawyers, there's no courtroom, there's no trial, there's no jury, there's no booths. It's just Christ. It's just Christ. And Christ, as he's portrayed by Isaiah, covered in what looks like a man who walked through a wine press. His garments are covered in that crimson. It's him who judges us. You know, in each one of these readings, and this one in particular, and for instance, every one of these metaphors about the judgment of God, it says some kind of different version of what the judgment could be. In this one, it says the outer darkness, or if you translate that in another way, it could be those who did not follow God or who judged are put in the darkness outside where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's one way it's written, as though they're outside of a party, outside of the feast. Others talk about a period of punishment, like the reading after this in Matthew chapter 25. Others refer to it as total destruction, the wheat and the chaff. Others talk about a debtor's prison where the person is thrown until he pays back the last cent. If each one of these metaphors were to be taken literally, there is no consonance in them. The reason that these stories are there for us is to reveal to us that there is a judgment. And so what is the thing that we understand about the judgment of God? As Chrysostom would say, it's a funny one. It's a strange one. It's nothing more than standing in the presence of God, who is the judgment. His very presence is a judgment. And how we are judged is according to us, how we have lived our lives, what we have done. And so in the reading for today, there's an immediacy to it. When you read this story, it comes right after the story of the virgins with their lamps. And how that story ends is, be prepared, be ready, because you don't know the day or the hour. And then he says, and there was a man. Here's a parable for you. He's talking about the immediacy there. And what does he even say about the people who have 5 talents and 2 talents? Immediately they go and work their workout with the banker. Immediately they go to do the stuff they're going to do. But this other person who has 1 talent, and remember, a talent, we shouldn't feel bad because this person only has 1 in this parable. A talent is 20 years of work. It's currency. In other words, it's already the master's in the first place, and he's loaned this to this person to see what they will do with it. And so what the story is of this person is they don't immediately do it. It says that the person is called wicked and slothful. Actually, it's a better translation to call him wicked and timorous. That's a good word for your SATs if anybody's young. Timorous. If you notice that he says in there, he says that he was afraid of this person. He's afraid of the master. I know you to be this person. Timorous means a person who's hesitating out of fear. It's almost like a paralysis by analysis, as you might say in the modern day. That's what the person is. They're not productive. And so what the person has done is they've taken a talent given to them by God, and this is considered currency in this parable. In English, the metaphor talent works for us because we think of gifts and things like that. But this person has been given something that wasn't even theirs in the first place. Totally invested with this gift by God. And the parable there, if you read Gregory the Great, is meant to say we are meant to take these gifts and talents, like Father talked about with the children, maybe of doing icons, maybe of chanting, maybe the gift of oration, maybe the gift of doing taxes, maybe the gift of building, whatever your gift is, and to give it back to God for His glory. And here, a person cannot just opt out. We can't just say no. It doesn't work that way. As a matter of fact, Gregory the Great says, you're not allowed to walk away from this. You can't just pretend ignorance that it's not there, that this gift hasn't been given to us. There is no opting out. As a matter of fact, if you could say what is opting out, the imagery of the parable puts it perfectly. He buries it. Death. That's what a person does with a talent. Dies. And somehow returning to God goes, this is it. I didn't do anything with it. And there, of course, you can see in the judgment from the master, what do you mean? My saints, like St. Paul, have said, having nothing, they made many people rich. I took disciples who were from obscure backgrounds, some of them illiterate, and helped them change the whole world. Not much is required of us. As a matter of fact, to these stories about the 5 getting 5 more and 2 getting 2 more, Gregory the Great says this is not just about investing in our day-to-day lives, although that is important. A life wasted is nothing good at all, maybe out of fear or whatever else. But the deeper end of the pool is, how are we doing this for God's glory? What are we doing with the gifts that God has given us for God's glory? To invest in the bankers, according to Gregory the Great, is just to love on the people around you. It's just to be who God has called you to be. Some of us are gifted with the ability to heal people. And they turn that into an entire life of taking care of folks, these doctors and others. Some are good at fundraising. Again, some are good at building. The purpose of the talents that God has given to us is that they are meant to be used to grow His kingdom. And it's not like He's asking a whole lot. As a matter of fact, if you read the parable that comes after this, at the very end it says there in the Greek, take this servant and throw him outside into the darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. A very great image of a person remorseful of not being allowed into the banquet. And then it begins the very next line, and the king will sit on his throne and he'll gather the nations around him. Kind of this gathering. And there he goes through who's in and who's out. And what does he say? As you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. And as you did it not to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it not to me. John Chrysostom will say, there is nothing so cold. Sorry for the quote. I need a mirror up here for myself. There is nothing so cold as a Christian who does not work for the salvation of others. He goes further to say, don't you know the gifts that God has given us are for the common good? Our whole life is an exercise in doing that. And so a person might say, okay, well and good, Father, well, how? And this is really simple. By sharing, by forgiving, by sheltering, by visiting, by feeding, by clothing, by doing all those things reveal to the world around us who God is and how He loves us. So this is the story, to remember that all the talents that God has given us, and we have more than we think we have. And here nobody can claim to have none. Even people whose entire life, forgive me, whose entire life may be one of really difficult suffering, say of a disease, can itself be a witness to the God of love and the God of truth. That can be a person's whole vocation. Every one of us in this room were given a vocation by God. Every one of us were given gifts by God. And if we're willing to look at the commands of God about feeding the poor, about praying and fasting, about doing these different things, each one of us will uniquely respond to that and thereby take the talents that God has given to us. And even if we don't think we're doing much, we double and triple and quadruple the gift that God has given to us. When do we do this? This will sound very cliche. It was Horace, in the first century. He's a Roman poet. He said in one of his first books, the Odes, Carpe Diem. Sounds like something a high schooler would say at some speech when they're running for class office. Carpe Diem. What does that literally mean? It does not literally mean seize the day. It means pluck the day. Pluck the day. And in context, what does he say? He says something just like St. Paul today. Pluck the day. He says, because you cannot trust tomorrow. And he says, trust tomorrow even less than you would trust today, is what he writes. The judgment of God is right now. Right now. Now, as Paul says, now is the day of our salvation. Now is the day to act. Now God is. Now we have our gifts. Now we can enter into the kingdom of heaven. Now we can offer hope to the world. We can change the whole cosmos now. And based upon how we do that, whether we have a lot of talents or a few, the God of love will be the judge of us. But again, it will be our actions, what we've done with these talents, that will be whether we have accepted the God of love, accepted His gifts to us and honored them, or tried to bury them. To God be the glory.